People ask me, don't you miss the faders and the patching and everything? That's like asking a lumberjack if he misses the handsaw. It's about the tools. The tools are a way to get you to the music. The music is the goal, not the tools. The tools are getting so incredibly good that we can do so much more work in such a shorter time, and it's still great work. We're not losing our quality because we're going fast. We're going fast because the processes they've taken the hard work out of it for us. It's still about how you hear the music. My engineering breakthrough really came about through the advent of MIDI. I was just able to comprehend MIDI as a routing, as a plumbing system very well, and at the time it was very new and people couldn't get it, that you could play a keyboard over here and the one over there is going to make a sound. How does that actually work? So I kind of weaseled in through the MIDI systems, and I was substituting at a studio called Secret Sound for the engineer who wanted to go out to the beach on the weekends. And the boss took a liking to me. And when he moved on to a larger studio called Counterpoint, he said, Dave, come take a walk with me. And I ended up getting that gig and holding the keys to a 24-track studio in my hand the next Monday morning. It was kind of an epiphany, and it was baptism by fire. My first gig probably wasn't the smoothest engineering gig in history, but I somehow got through it, and the clients were happy at the end, and I knew that's what I was going to do at that point. I have a specific way of organizing my sessions when I first get the audio from somebody. Since I come from the days of analog tape, I put the drums first, then the bass, then the guitars and keyboards, background vocals and vocals. For me, from left to right is how it feels natural. So I first lay out my sessions. I have some routing presets that I keep in a template, and I get it a pretty quick rough balance. My next consideration would be the genre and what the producers have been thinking about, and the artists, of course, have been thinking about while they created, because these days the home studio is so powerful, they can get the production pretty far along before I see it. What they really want me to do is grab that baton and bring it home the last lap. So they're not looking to me to change everything and reinvent the wheel. They want to hand me this product that they're really proud of, and I pump it full of steroids and send it back, and they're like, wow, that sounds amazing. The different genres of recording have certain specific attributes that are, they do overlap a bit, but some have very specific attributes. For example, classical is really all about the miking technique and position and capturing the moment of that sound in a space. And then jazz is maybe less so. The mics are a little bit closer, and even though the guys may be isolated in the recording, you want the final product to sound like they're interacting and looking at each other without headphones on. And as you progress through pop and R&B, things get more and more isolated, more and more close-mic'd and specific and harder hitting, all the way to hip-hop, which is a sample of a drum with no air, but it's very powerful, and the voice is very powerful in your face. But I think you can cross-pollinate all those genres. If you take that impact of pop and hip-hop and bring it into your jazz mixing, the jazz guys go, wow, my stuff never sounded so immediate. And if you take that tactile quality of classical music and try to bring it into the guitars, for example, or the acoustic instruments, the strings, let's say, on a pop record, and get that real tactile vibe that feels like you're sitting right next to them in a pop record, that's what makes a really, really good pop record. I never want to be considered, oh, he's a jazz engineer, or he's a dance engineer. I want to do everything. And that keeps you fresh and young. Each day is a new test. And you never really stop learning about it. Microphone technique, compression technique, gear, routing, you constantly learning. Even in my point in my career, almost every day or week I find some new technique that I hadn't really considered, and I roll it into my bag of tricks, keep it stored for the next time I might need it. So I think about the genre that they're in and who they're competing with and what kind of radio or iTunes they're listening to and who's in that world and what people have done. Because that's the bar. There's so much great music out in the world, and I have no problem with listening to somebody else's mix and going, wow, that reverb is awesome. I wonder how he did that, and trying to beat it. It's a constant game of trying to beat the other guy who you respect and love the work of. As soon as I get it set up, the next thing I would do right away in terms of actually tackling it would be to isolate the vocals and fit them into that genre, because you want to be fresh. The vocal is obviously the most important thing. That's what's going to sell the song. So you want to do that early in the day while your ears are clear and your mind is clear, and then work back through the band. One thing about not having a template, it enables you to have a certain empathy for each project that you're working on. You got to think about it this way. Here's a sax player that gives you his quartet that he recorded. This guy has been playing sax for 20-something years. He's been thinking about his reeds, his tone, his scales. That's his life. He's giving you his heart in your hands, you know, and you have to take care of it. You can't just say, well, it's a Dave Darlington mix and this is what I do to the sax. I mean, I think that would be very arrogant and foolish in a way. I don't really try to make a Dave Darlington sound. I try to just let the work speak for itself, and it's done me pretty well, because that sax player, if he's happy and then he records in another ensemble with somebody else, who should we get to mix? Well, I used Dave, and it was really a great experience because I trusted him on his side. He's the artist. I'm just framing his art. That's what engineers really are. We're framing the art that's been created, so you have to be very sensitive to the content. In more acoustic traditional recording like classical and jazz, it's more about the ensemble and the space. Obviously, if it's a pianist record or a sax player's record, it's their record. But I learned from those guys, let's say you record a piano trio, perhaps in the past I would have put the piano forward and the bass and drums back, and the three guys would come in the control room and they would go, nah man, it's a trio, it's democratic. And what they really meant is they want to hear their ensemble in a space. The thing about jazz and classical is there's air around the music. It's recorded in a space. You want that sense of space. You want panning. You want this guy slightly over here, not crazy far, but you know, when you look at the stage, some guys are here, some guys are there. The soloist is forward and in the middle. So it's a little bit of answer of yes and no. I do feature the soloist, and of course we work really hard on his sound, how wet he should be. But those acoustic recordings are ensembles first and foremost, and they're in a sound stage. They're in a sound field. And that's what you have to think about when you do acoustic music. Well, my journey through music is a little bit roundabout. It might help inspire people who are wondering how they're really going to get into the business. I grew up in Miami, Florida in the 60s. I was 12 years old when the Beatles hit America. So like everybody in my crowd, I begged my parents for an electric guitar. And I ended up on the bass just because the other two guys that I knew got guitars first. We still needed a bass player. So I played bass in garage bands all through high school, loved those 60s records, and just loved records in general. I went to college not for music, for architecture, and soon discovered that it wasn't for me, that I really had a passion for music. So I switched to music in college and studied classical and jazz. For a while, I thought I might become a classical musician. I played in orchestras and stuff, but the draw of New York was too powerful. So I threw my stuff in my van and drove to the city and tried to make my way as a bass player. Over the course of a few years, I started making some demos for people on my little 8-track home recording setup and weaseling my way into the studios. Studios were the temples, the palaces, where you had to have a certain knowledge and a certain level of skill to even be allowed in. And when you got in, they were so amazing. You just looked around at all the lights and the knobs and everything. Well, how does anybody possibly know how to work all this stuff? Eventually, by making those demos and attaching myself to artists, they would drag me into the studios when they would make the records, and I would learn by sitting there. I started applying what I knew from live gigs and from music in general towards how the technicians and the engineers were running the gear and how they were making records come from the music, how to turn the music into a recorded art form. And I fell in love with it. I couldn't stay away. High-end engineers won't just put one effect. This is kind of one thing that separates demo mixes and home mixes from professional mixes. And I learned this by studying some LA and Babyface tapes that I was given to remix, and the mix notes were in there. And the engineer, who's very famous and very great, I won't say his name, but he would run his reverb through a harmonizer. So the reverb would have the reverb tail like we know, and the vocal would have reverb on it, but there was something about that reverb that just was in that record and so beautiful and gorgeous. What was it? It was a harmonization on the tails, not on the voice. The voice was still here. The artist was front and center, but that reverb was a gift from heaven. So mixing is a lot like cooking. You know, you put a little celery, you put a little pepper, you taste it, Okay, now we're missing a little chorusing on the reverb. Yeah, now we're getting somewhere. I mix a lot by myself and send it off on the internet, but I enjoy it when they're here too because we vibe. Hey, how do you like that? Yeah, maybe a little too much, but I like it. I'd like to say something to the guys who are just trying to learn by watching these videos, and I admire you going and searching out tutorials and everything. I did it as a student. It wasn't so much video, it was books. And learning is everything. You're never going to stop learning. But another point I'd like to make is you could watch 1,000 videos about playing the violin. If you don't pick up the violin, you're not going to be a violin player. So take what all of us are saying and all the things you read on the boards and everything, and get in there and mix and compare your mixes to everybody else. You're not gonna be Chris Lord-Alge this week. It's gonna take a while. I would hate to go back and listen to my mixes from 1985. Thank God I don't have to. But you keep doing it. You keep doing it. You learn. You grow towards the light. The things that work, you keep. The things that don't work, you discard. And don't be afraid to experiment. Experiment, 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 and then make value judgments. Be proud of your taste in music. Keep refining your taste. Be proud of it. This works. I love the way this sounds. That's my thing now. And that's part of your bag of tricks. And keep on growing. The bag of tricks you have this decade will not be the bag of tricks you have next decade because the technology will continue to grow. So you have to continue to grow. A career in the music business is about sticking with it and just keeping at it, keep hammering and keep learning.